So today we're going to be looking at the parish of Kilmorack, which is a parish in the middle of the Highlands of Scotland, not that far from Inverness. And it's an interesting parish in that it stretches quite a long way across from more or less the west coast to more or less the east coast, unlike almost every other parish that we'll be looking at in these sessions. So the research has been done by our friend here, Neil Adams, who's in Tauranga in New Zealand. And he sent me a photo some time ago, some years ago, about him being at a little tiny church up in the upcountry in Kilmorack, and that's what prompted me to ask him to be involved in the presentation. For those of you that haven't been to these meetings before, we primarily use the old statistical accounts which were written in the 1790s to describe more the economic circumstances of these different parishes. And it's a great insight into what life was like in Scotland in these particular places before any sort of significant migrations happened, before people were changing around where they lived, and before really the Industrial Revolution had a serious impact on their lives. We'll also use the Fasti, which is the succession of the ministers in Scotland, and some maps and various other resources to look at the everyday life of people as far as we can understand it in this particular parish in the 1790s. To do that, we'll be thinking about topography, about the location of this place, about the size of it, what sort of things were done to earn an income, earn some sustenance, and to live. Also the number of people there, the sort of work they might have had opportunities to get, something about their health and so on, these things here. This is the first page of the old statistical account here, and you can see this parish is in the county of Inverness. And Inverness is a parish we don't normally look at very much for McLennans. We normally see them in Ross and Cromarty, but in this case, it's in the parish of Inverness, as was the one we did a couple of sessions ago that was on the island of Skye. That's part of the county of Inverness. The minister, he wrote this in 1798. So in fact, it was in the last volume of these old statistical accounts that was in the normal format. The next one, 21, XX1, was more like a sort of catch up of corrections and addendums and various other things, and was not one of the normal ones. You remember that these statistical accounts were written by the ministers in the parish, usually one of the few people who could write in the parish, and he would write a report answering a number of questions that they were given, but you know, introducing a bit of their own interests and flavour to the subject. So that was, and they sent them in progressively from the early 1790s until the late 1790s, and you can see this one is quite a late one. So he sent it in a bit late, and then they published them as they arrived. So they're in no order. They're not like all the Inverness ones together, Inverness County ones together, and all the Ross and Cromarty ones together. They're just one after the other as they arrived. In these things, they usually describe in the beginning here something about the naming of the place and the extent of it. You can see here that this parish, Kilmorack, is named for the Saint Morach, and in fact, that differs from what this fellow over here says. He says that it's a young girl called Mary, who is probably one of the descendants of the Lairds of Chisholm, who were the one of the landowners in this parish. So this, though, is the more reliable source, Fasti. That's why I put the sick there. It's quite a long parish. He says it's 60 miles long, but it's actually only 80 kilometres long, which of course in the old money is 50 miles. But quite a long parish because it extends from one side to the other. It actually goes right down beside Kintail, as we saw last time off that map that we saw, shaped like deer's horns, that had Kilmorack along the bottom of it. We didn't know that when we did that, that we'd be doing this one so soon after. Essentially, the parish, the core of the parish revolves around the River Bewley and its tributaries. And that's all there is to it, really. The parish is to do with the River Bewley and its, upstream things. Anything else there? It says here, it is not probably in Scotland a parish of greater extent, stretching, that's the S there, written like an F, from Taradale, which we know is in Urry, to, and on the next page it says a thing that implies it's in Kintail, the River Crow. So here's a modern map just to give you a bit of orientation about where we're talking about. Here's the River Bewley here, comes out into this loch, this sea loch, which is inland from the Inverness and the Kessock Bridge. This is called Murray here, Firth, and this up here is the Bewley. This is the River Bewley. You can see it there going up, and here are the tributaries of the River Bewley. They come down this direction, out that way, and out that way. So essentially, the parish is all this area in here like that. And you can see it adjoins Kintail down here. This Glen Affric is actually a river that comes and locks down in here that are not shown on this map because nobody ever drives there. I think this is more a driving map than a proper aerial view. So as they say, it stretches from Kintail down here, this parish, to Taradale, which is up here in near the Muir of Ord there. And you might remember that Tina, in our last meet, not Tina, Catherine showed us in this group that there was a track that was used by the Kintail people and also for people who were coming from other parts to go across. If they wanted to go to the east coast, they would come across below Kintail here, up beside the River Crow, and then go on up this way to Bewley. This is a modern map. You can see all these other places that we've already looked at now, can't you? Like here's Loch Marie and Ullapool up here. Here's Applecross in here, Loch Carron in here. All these places we've already looked at. Here, of course, is the parish we looked at in Skye, Broadford being the capital of it, that lovely picture of the conical mountain behind it. So looking in a bit more detail, excuse me, here's the parish boundary. I'm not sure this is actually the one that was in place in the 1790s because there were changes in the late 1800s to the boundaries of these parishes. So it may or may not be the one that was in place in 1790, but it's a similar thing. And starting from our original proposition, here's the river coming up from Kintail. It's actually the boundary between Glen Shiel and Kintail. And here's the head of that, the source of that river up here. And then you can see this river that's going in that direction is here. So the watershed is here right on the boundary. So the boundary is the watershed between the river that forms the boundary between Kintail and Glen Shiel. And this is where people do that walking, Tina says, and they were talking even about putting a road through here in the early 1800s. Didn't happen. But then you go up here. This is Loch Affric, and then the river continues on, and here's this other river coming in here. Here's the other river coming in here, and then the confluence, and it goes on out to Bewley. So it's 580 square kilometres. It's not as big as most of them. You remember we saw that the Loch Broom parish was like 1,000 square kilometres. So this is not in that league, but it's a big one, and you can see it stretching, virtually within reach of both sides. The other neighbouring parishes, Loch Alsh comes all the way up to here. Kathy will be pleased to hear that. You've got Urry up here, and Conton doesn't touch this one. Then you've got Kirkhill up here on the Firth, on the Bewley. And then you've got, this is quite an important parish to know about in the context of this parish, because they're very much interconnected, these two. And then down here you've got Urquhart and Glenmoriston. This is a picture. So I'm taking you to this to look at this lock in here, this one. And I'm standing here at this end of it, looking westward, yeah, or southwest. And so this is Loch Affric, beautiful, isn't it? It's quite remote and quite a sort of small road gravel road to get down to it. And you can see, the thing here is that you can see in the distance the Five Sisters of Kintail. How good is that? So I'm giving you the segue from our last meeting, right? Lovely. This is actually quite a baronial looking, you know, classic thing with peaked little turrets and castles and everything on my left here when I took this photo. And we have a book. The reason I went there was that I was following up on a book that had been sent to me, or was being given to me at the time, by a fellow called Duncan McLennan, who's since passed. But his father had lived to nearly 100 years old, and he'd encouraged his father to write a book which is called My Yesteryears in Glenafric. You see, he spells it a different way. He was a deer stalker in the you know, 1920s and 30s, that sort of time. So 30s and 40s maybe. Yeah, in this area, deer stalker for the estate. So this is the stuff that's going to be on the exam, this slide, so pay attention. Barbara, are you watching?
Yes. Do you have that book? Is it, can we?
Yeah, just go to the histories. You know how to do it. You just go to the middle column of the main homepage, histories, and look up My Yesteryears in Glenafric. Just look through the book covers that are there and you'll see that one. It's a lovely story of his life as a deer stalker, and, you know, gives you all these first-hand accounts of what life was like. Yeah, so here's the church of this parish here. You see there it says Kilmorack. And at this time, the church for the neighbouring parish that I said was such an interconnected one with this parish, Kiltartity, was actually here, just opposite. This is the river coming through here, winding its way down to the sea because it's fairly flat down here. And the church for Kiltartity was actually there just on the other side of the river. These days, the parish church is over here where it says Kiltartity. Now you can see it's there twice the name. Coming back then to the bigger picture, this is these are the two rivers. This is down here is Glenafric we talked about, and here's the river coming up here called the Glass River, or the River Glass, or Glass Water could be called, and that comes to here and it joins the river coming down in this direction. The Farah or Farah, you know, it's spelt with an E sometimes and with an A, most more likely. And that the confluence of those three rivers is here. And then that passes down here, goes, see this island in here that's in the river? I'm going to talk about that later. And then comes down here to where the kirk is and goes on winding down. This is an important wood in here called Balblair Wood. And then it winds its way down, and you've got down here the town of Bewley. And at that time, this is a bit later map. This is a map that's used for both the 1840s statistical account and the 1790s ones. So about 1820. And but still, you had to cross the river here by ferry. So you would come from Inverness along here, and you'd get to this, and you'd wait for the ferry and cross over and go into Bewley. Bewley is quite a tiny place in the 1790s. You'll see that a bit more about that later. So that's the sort of big picture. You note this place here, Beaufort. That's quite important for you to know about that. That's the seat of the most significant landholder in the parish we're looking at today, the Beaufort Castle. Doesn't actually say castle there, but it is a castle. Couple more things just to look at is that there's this place, Struy, which is up here, spelt in various ways. They spell it here S-T-R-A-Y, I believe. You see it's there. It's just above the confluence of the rivers. But these days it's spelt this way. Sometimes it's spelt I-E, S-T-R-U-I-E. And there's this place, Cairnock, as opposed to Cannock. They're two separate places, which is down here. Here. This area here, this is called the Glass River, but the thing that's called the Strathglass encompasses not only this river here, but also quite a bit of the land down to about here. And about this point here, there's the river narrows because the rocks are obviously greater on the sides, and it's not planted out or anything. So there's a bit of a sort of natural boundary here forming for agriculture and so on, because this is more like wooded than it is planted out. And there's another place in here called Aigis. You see that word there? It's got an AR on the end of it, but normally it's just spelled AIGAS. That's that name there. Okay. Anything else I've missed? No. Two Kirks opposite each other. Okay. No questions? So coming now, we're going to go down the river. So we're going to start down here and we're going to work our way up the river and see what sort of physical features, so that you'll understand the map. I think it's important, when you're doing research in these places, to know your maps and to know where things are. When you see a name, you can relate it to different spellings and so on, and mistranscriptions too, for that matter. So Bewley, reputedly refers to the French, is a corruption of the French word beau lieu, meaning, the expression is, this is a beautiful place, and that's where the name comes from. In the Gaelic, it's known as the monastery. This is the Gaelic word, or that's the English translation. And the locality really relates to the priory that's there in Bewley. That's really what it's talking about when it talks about Bewley. The word comes from that. So all the other Bewley names, like the village, like the river, like the firth, are all derived from the priory that was there on this spot, this beautiful spot called Bewley, Beaulieu. And that village itself actually had only been created recently from money that was sourced from the forfeited estates that resulted from the Culloden and the Jacobite risings. And so they had the money and they set up this village alongside the priory, giving the village the name of the priory. But in the 1790s, it was very tiny. The centre of the parish was really still the kirk that we saw is further upstream. It later became a market for cattle and sheep and so on, and then that activity moved just outside Bewley, actually between Bewley and Muir of Ord, which is a place in Urry, near where the golf course is. I think the market was. That's probably almost closer to Bewley than it is to the Muir of Ord, although they claim the credit because it's in Urry Parish. Interestingly, this place became an outlet for timber, the village, because there's so much woodland in the inland, and the landlords had quite early on got a head start with planting out Scottish fir, and they used this village as a way to, ship out, because the village was located at a point where navigable point on the river for smaller boats. It's silted up and not very appropriate for it anymore, but in those days it was quite a little port in its own right, Bewley. They not only shipped things in and out of there, but they even built ships themselves, and we'll see that later. The beautiful Lovett Bridge, which we'll see shortly, wasn't built until 1811. I showed you earlier there how we had to go across by ferry to get to Bewley from Inverness. It's called the Great North Road, the road that goes up through here to, on up to Sutherland and so on. So here's a map, a plan I found really of the village of Bewley in 1832. This is a plan that was put out to show the new additions to the town. You can see how tiny it is even after the new additions, right? So in 1832, the new additions, I don't know how many additions were made in 1832, but let's say it was a third or a half of them. It was pretty tiny before 1832, these new additions came along. You can see, I turned this map around so it's oriented more or less similarly to this 1955 map. You can see here the road going out. That's the road going out again in 1955. This map shows the square, much more like a square, right? I mean, it's rectangular, of course. Barbara, you were going to pick me up on that, weren't you? I'm talking about the town square, but it's rectangular. So the square, you can see much more clearly is a square there, whereas in the 1955 aerial photo, it's not that clear that it's that's its purpose, because the road has been put just through at a diagonal there. And this is just parking along here, and here's where the hotel is and so on today. But the main feature of this, of course, is the priory, and there it is in 1832. It had been there since forever, almost. And you can see it in this map as well. Quite a big building, narrow, aisleless, actually. No aisle in the middle like most churches have. We'll talk about that in more detail later. And in this map, you can see more clearly that there's a key there. You see, it says key on that. I know it's written vertically, but it says key there, and you can see just the remains of it in 1955. I asked a fellow who was born in 1934, who lived all his life in early, till recently, he lived in Bewley, and he said that even when he was young, there were only sort of remains of the wharfing operations that obviously were so important in the 1790s. Quite interesting. So any questions about that? Put your hand up. Just wave your hand if you like.
Yeah.
Barbara.
Bruce, was the priory demolished by Henry VIII?
Oh, I don't know about that, but it wasn't demolished. It's still there today. It's got roofless today, but it's quite a. I see what you mean. You mean like not so much ruined, but all the funds stolen and taken over by. No, I don't think so.
Yes.
It wouldn't happen because Scotland was a separate country. Probably that's the answer to that. So here is the beautiful Bewley Bridge, which, as I say, it's called the Lovett Bridge. It's just upstream. We're now moving up the river, and this is the beautiful Bewley River. Quite a lovely thing, isn't it? Lots of nice green trees. I took this photo obviously on a fairly good day, but it's been enhanced a bit to make it a bit bluer. And so it's a 4-arch bridge built, under the auspices of Telford, who did so much work in all these parts. His team anyway designed this bridge. It was constructed by someone who's quite well known. I can't remember now the name, but lovely, isn't it? The river. And this is the way. This is really at the top tidal point of the river. That's why it's back a bit. So if I go back to the map here, this one, there was the ferry, and then now it's the road comes across and joins that road there. You see that? So that you come down here and you go across because it's tidal here, and better to build a bridge upstream from the tide. So there you go. That's the Lovett Bridge. And the minister himself is quite wrapped in the country, how beautiful it is. He says, in a typical old statistical account way, understated, double negative, that sort of thing. You've got to read between the lines. He says, it must be allowed, the general face of the country it contains is very far from unpleasant. What the hell does that mean? You got to think, you got to sort of focus on it a bit. But he's saying, well, it's not unpleasant. Fair enough. Very far from unpleasant. So, as he says, at the eastern extremity, we behold the Firth and the beautiful, we should say, beautify windings of the Bewley. Snakes around going down there, lovely. He says, most of the barren ground and the hills, almost to their summits, are covered with large plantations of Scotch fir and a variety of natural woods. So, this is a beautiful thing, no bare hills like we've seen so often in many of these other places. And I just added this last quote of his here. He says, as romantic and delightful scenery as is to be met within Scotland. Well, high praise. He obviously likes it. They're all quotes from the old statistical account. Here's a picture of the river. I'll take my pointer away. Lovely, isn't it? Now, getting down to the tin tacks here. This is, we're coming up the river. We've passed on our left-hand side the seat of the Frasers on the left in Kiltarnity Parish, but he's the main landlord of this parish, the biggest. We've passed the Beaufort Castle. Now we're coming up the river. They're passing under a bridge here. This is the Black Bridge, as it's called. And here you can see that parish in the Kiltarnity Parish. You see there it says on this 1871 map, church in ruins, in brackets. And then it says graveyard. there. Can you see that? And you can see also here a sawmill out of interest. You know, that's another thing you do because they got all this timber in the parish. They got they need sawmills. Black Bridge, it says there. Not sure what that says underneath. Anyway, and you come across, and over here we have the church. This is our church for this parish, KILMORACK, and that's where it is. And over the road from it is the graveyard for the church. So the graveyard on this side is the older of the two graveyards for this church. There are now many headstones around the back of the church on that side, but in those days this was the graveyard for the church. And they're overlooking this wonderful thing, which is these falls, these famous tourist attractions. The KILMORACK Falls are right there beside the church. Look at that. It says here, Lower Falls, KILMORACK. And up here it says Upper Falls, KILMORACK. But these are the main ones. And they're reasonable, not really high, but they're high enough. So and beautiful. And the manse is here. And perhaps most importantly, this is what gives the parish, the place that gives the parish the name, KILMORACK here, which is not much to write home about, really. Even today, it's just a handful of buildings, not a village in any sense, just a locality.
Bruce, can I mention something?
Sure.
When I toured Billy Connolly twice to Australia in the 80s, and I had to have a separate company formed, and I formed Bewley Proprietary Limited.
Ah, well done you.
Yeah, a little touch of Scotland and Australia for Billy Connolly.
Good on you, Cole.
Okay, mate.
So this is the church area here. I do want to mention this Balblair Wood here because you can see what an important thing it is, the Balblair Wood at that time, and it's going to come up later. So you've got to know that reference point to relate to the other parts. I think I mentioned all those places. I should say, from my point of view, this map is quite interesting because my great-grandfather was born here at this little locality. You can see in the 1870s there was a pheasantry there on that road. That's where he was born. And the house that's there, the two houses that are there now are after he was born. But that's where my great-grandfather was born. And the interesting thing about it is that the border of the parish, you see it comes down the middle of the river here. And at this point it heads off in this direction. You see that dotted line going around there, and up here, around there, through the middle of this sort of thing. And that's it says there, written amongst the trees, old parish border follows the old course of the river. So this is where the river used to be. Now, whether that was the course of the river in the 1790s, I'm not sure. Could have been, quite possible. And then the boundary goes down there, you see. So, he was actually born in KILMORACK, really, on the north side of the Bewley. That's just a little quirky thing, right? So here's the falls that we saw in that map just now. And here are the salmon leaping up, trying to get above these falls. They're not that high, really. I don't know what, in meters, 10 meters, maybe, something like that. I'm guessing. But and so below the falls, salmon abound is the way you put it. It's just full up with salmon down there, and so active, swirling about and so on. And this is just in front of the kirk. Remember, few of the salmon, only a very small number, the minister says, get above the falls and go on to do their spawning upstream. If they do get over, they've got 30 kilometres they can travel upstream to further, but very few do get over. He says that below the falls, the river is among the best in Scotland for salmon fishing, and that it's not unknown for people to catch 20 or 30, one person to catch 20 to 30 salmon, big fish, in one day. Pretty good, eh? And he says that the people lay branches on the rocks here like this. They put a branch in there, and so when the salmon, instead of leaping up the direct falls, they go to the rocks on the side to try and get over the falls, they just pick them up with their hands. You don't need a fishing rod to catch fish there. You just put a branch down and they get stuck on the branch when they're trying to get back into the river and get caught. That's pretty good, isn't it? And he says that the Laird, Lord Lovett, yeah, who's the owner of most of the properties in the whole area, he conducted an experiment one time of getting his people to light a fire and put a kettle on the fire near the bank, and within minutes a large salmon leapt out of the water and into the pot. No need to catch it. Just cook it. It cooks itself. That's a pretty good thing. This is in the statistical account. It's quite a good yarn, isn't it? May or may not be true, but it's obviously believed. If the minister wrote it, it must be true, mustn't it? Barbara, that's a joke. Another one. So Lovett, Lord Lovett, the Frasers, has the rights. The salmon catching is in his property, and he has leased it out to a fellow from Perth in Perthshire, John Richardson. And you think, well, that's a bit rough, but actually John Richardson, as the minister, goes on at some great length about how generous he is and how liberal and well beneficent. He uses all these words to describe this fellow at some length in the statistical account. He says that in the early 1780s, this John Richardson was very timely with his charity to help the people when they were suffering a want of food, shortage of harvest. And he's so well appreciated so he's sort of been brought into the parish to have this salmon fishing lease, but he's been very kind to the local people, which is an interesting thing. But of course the sad thing is today that this is all gone. Today all you see is a hydroelectric dam, and then on the shore you've got quite a big substation for sending off the power to the world. So no falls anymore, sad to say. Upstream though, you do have quite a lot of inland freshwater lakes that are stocked, not artificially stocked, they're just full of pike and trout. So there's quite a lot of fish to be caught up there. And any salmon that do get above the falls, the Laird and whatnot don't want to know about them because there's so few that do that. They think it's not worth trying to catch them. He calls it killing them. But it doesn't. The Laird doesn't want to. He doesn't mind if people catch them upstream once they get over, if they do. So going further upstream now, you've got this area I described where the trees come down and the river narrows because of the rocky conditions there, and it is quite a picturesque thing. But all these places, the falls and this area here called Droom, were scenic things that people used to come and visit. It was written up at some length. And this particular photo is, from Victorian times. So this photo would be 150 years old. And it's by this famous photographer, George Washington Wilson, who lived from 1823 to 1893. Obviously, it's after photography. So it's got to be after 1860 odd, give or take. Quite a scenic spot. Now, I'm going to take you a little bit further up the river. Remember I pointed out an island in the middle of the river? Well, this is the island we're talking about now. And on the island, the Lord Lovett had built a hunting lodge, and he'd used it to accommodate these two fellows who claimed to be the true descendants of Bonnie Prince Charlie. Bonnie Prince Charlie was, they claimed that their father had been the child of Charles Edward Stuart and his wife when they all lived in Rome. And they obviously, someone wanted to believe them because they behaved like courtiers, like they were running their court there in this island. This is them. They'd take their boat with great grandeur up the river to the church. They became Roman Catholics so that they could show their true colours. They called themselves the Sobieski Stuarts, but their real name was Allen, John and Charles Allen. But they had people conned for a long time. Even the Lord, you see, the Laird there in the estate, took them at their word, and they would, quite believe. What does it tell us, really? That's probably the question. You can go and look them up. There's the address there, Wikipedia, Sobieski Stuarts. And you can find out what a tremendous con job they did from 1838 to 1845. But they were born in the 1790s or 1802 date. The only descendants of Charles Edward Stuart. It's such a funny thing. But it sort of tells you something, that a bit like the American Civil War lost cause argument, that perhaps people in this district really wanted to believe that the Stuarts could return, or really were entitled to return. They wanted to believe. That's a good one, Barbara, don't you think? This is a good yarn. People still know about it today, in this part of the world. If you go there and talk about the Sobieski Stuarts, we know them. So coming back to the topography of this place.
What nationality were they?
What nationality? English. Just all, it doesn't help, does it, to be English? You're making assumptions there, Barbara. So this is the topography of this area, and we're going to learn a bit about how arable it is, aren't we? That's what we always learn from the topography maps. So we're just to get our bearings again. Here's the four main rivers, and starting at the top end, here's Loch Afric here. This river's coming down here. This is called the Strathglass in this section here. And we've got the River Cannock coming out there, joining at a place called Cannock, the Glass River, the River Glass. And then you've got the River Farrar coming down here, or Farrar, and joining here's the confluence here, and then the River Bewley coming down and out to the Firth. So the arable parts, you can see this is just a narrow little green strip through here, a little bit of green going up in there, not much green. When I drove down to here to take that photo, it's just driving on a hillside. There's no arable land there. And up here at the confluence, you've got a little bit of arable land, that's true. Down here, you've got a bit of arable land, that's where just above the island. And then you've got the bit that's got the trees coming down to the river's edge. And then around Bewley itself, here's Bewley in here. And this is a bit of arable land on the north bank of the river, the north side. So looking at the Gazetteer in 1882, even in 1882, of the 143 nearly acres of land in the whole parish, only 4,000 is arable. So that represents 2.8% of the parish is arable. That's going to be on the exam, that people you can make a little note of that. I won't mind if you cheat a bit. So that's tiny, isn't it? 2.8% of it arable, and you can just see it looking at this map once you start to focus on it. Just a little bit of arable land there and a bit in here. Otherwise, it's this huge area coming all around here and up here, the river. So coming back to this point here where the rivers meet, that's here, the confluence of the three rivers. You've got the seat of the other people from the parish we haven't talked about much yet, the Chisholm family. They go back a really long time. They've been there since the 1400s. They previously were in a thing called Comar Lodge, and then they moved to this one here called Ercles Lodge, Ercles Castle. And this building dates from about 1600. So, it's been there for a couple of hundred years nearly by the time our statistical account was written. I noted when I was researching this that this castle, which is actually quite fancy now. It looks a bit sort of primitive there in this sketch, but it's actually quite a fancy place with lots of turrets and all sorts. Sleeps 19, it's available for hire. Sleeps 19, seats at the dining table 18, and most luxurious looking appointments all throughout, and lots of marble and very fancy. The guests have access to the 12,000 acres of estate, thank you very much. And in the right time of year, they have access to 2 rather productive beats on the river for salmon fishing or trout. And so it, wouldn't be a bad gig for a couple of weeks. If you feel like a holiday, you could go and rent this out. I couldn't see the price. It said price available on application. I imagine it's cheap though, don't you? What do you think, Donna? Cheap? Really? Oh, you'd hope. Anyway, let's look at the population. So we've got 2,300 and something souls in the parish. That's can't be right, because he's obviously not very good at estimating various things, this minister. There are 30 aged over 69. There are nearly 70,000 over under 10 years. So quite a lot of young people, I guess. I don't know how that relates to normal parishes. He does not compare it to the Webster census of 1755, which is a shame because we often learn quite a bit. He's hampered, though, of course, by the fact that the upper part of the parish, which is where that castle we just looked at is, and where the Chisholms, as we know, are based, the Chisholm area is not under his domain because that's a Roman Catholic area, and he doesn't minister in that part. He says it's impossible with any degree of accurateness to ascertain the deaths, marriages, or births in so extensive a parish. Of the 2 former, meaning the deaths and the marriages, there are no registers kept. And there are so many papists in the Highland part of it, and we know about that now, that even births cannot with any certainty determined. So, he's saying this is a bit of a guess. So when he says 2318, it could be anything. What did I say? 23, yeah, 2,318. Here's a little picture of the geology of the area. Probably no surprises really that the stuff that's been washed down, which doesn't necessarily mean it's fertile. This is blue, these couple of blue sections here, but not a great deal of it, alluvium. The raised maritime deposits of these areas down near the end, so that's been uplifted. And otherwise, this is what's called till. It means it's all that. That's sort of like not very productive, gravelly stuff that's fallen down. And as opposed to the superficial geology, meaning on the surface, down in this section here, you've got a lot of sandstone, old red sandstone it's called. It's a bit like what we saw in Kilmoracck, the parish over this side of the Firth here, where Redcastle, not called Redcastle for nothing because it's made of red stone. Oh no, it was brick. Sorry, the old red sandstone though is quite common in this part and used widely, from all around other things. So that's what the base rock is, below the surface. Looking at the climate that we experience here, quite different from the lower part to the upper part. The average temperatures during the day are between about 8 degrees in the lower part, but about maybe 2 or 3 degrees in the upper part, average for the whole year. Pretty chilly. The rainfall, pretty reasonable in the lower part, but in the upper part, it can be like 3 to 4 meters of rain, a lot. That's a lot of rain. Even the hours of daylight are quite significantly less in the upper part of the parish. Great variations because of the sheer extent of the parish. He says, and I don't know whether this is true, like it's speculation or conjecture really, he says that there's recently been a colder conditions. He says that in 15, 20 years ago, the ploughmen used to get up at 2 and 3 in the morning and do their ploughing because it was too hot in the middle of the day to plough. But by these times, he says it's so hot that people are so cool, even in the daytime, people are getting around with a greatcoat, meaning a big woolen coat, and their hands muffled in worsted mitts against the frosty air. I think he's exaggerating. But anyway, that's his observation. What sort of things are produced there? Let's start with the cattle and the sheep. He says that it's impossible to ascertain just how many cattle there are. There are so many. A great many of the black cattle are sold each year to the south of Scotland and further south to England. Great numbers, thousands of them. So, this is very productive for cattle. And we're seeing so often in these sessions just how much people make from selling their cattle. It's such an important thing, really. It's much more important than the grain crops, the cattle, and how they earn typically as much as a year's wage for one cattle being sold, one cow. And so we thought we'd look a little bit more detail at what they're like, these, what we call black cattle. More often in the postcards and so on, you see the red coloured ones. They're the same really, but they've been bred to have the red hair. But the most common is the black version, and but the same cattle. And the fellow who did the research did quite a good job here, looking at some of the things that make these cattle so attractive for growing in the highlands. He says that they're intelligent and superior and docile, that the meat is lower in cholesterol and fat, higher in protein, and the cattle are slightly smaller, which makes them a bit easier to manage. They produce 2 gallons of milk a day. That's higher in butterfat than normal cattle milk, which gives means that the calves grow rapidly. The calves are quite small, so there are less problems with delivering the calves because of they're better suited to being born, birth process, and they have a good coat, and they're able to be kept warm and grow rapidly. These cattle have a typically 20-year lifespan, and the females can deliver 12 calves in that time, quite a good number. And this double coat protects them from the weather and keeps them warm and provides some sort of fibre too. They will eat almost anything that's nutritious, got some nutrient in it. They're pretty undiscriminating, unlike, horses and things. So that's quite a good thing. And the Queen, I think that means the Queen Victoria, will only eat the meat of these Highland cattle. There you go. And an interesting thing is that the whole herd will protect an individual from predators, maybe foxes and so on, like protect a calf, and not just leave it to the parents, the mother or the father of the calf, but the whole herd will protect an individual of the herd. So, that's an interesting, it's going, he said to me, it's, good once you just glossed over, they grow Highland cattle. But to actually hear this detail like that, I think is quite an interesting thing. Just you dig a bit deeper and this is what you find, this interesting observations. There's no talk about sheep farms at all in the old statistical account for this parish. So there you go. Although almost every household has a handful of sheep that they use for domestic purposes, obviously a bit of meat and also for the wool. And the really interesting thing is that there's no mention of horses either. So what does that mean? I don't know. It could mean that horses are so normal and prevalent that he doesn't even think of mentioning them, or it could mean that they use cattle for ploughing and so on, because there obviously is a bit of ploughing goes on in some of those little arable areas we saw. Wouldn't all be done by hand. So he doesn't mention horses, and there are no sheep farms. So, as well as the cattle thing that's so interesting, and so important to this parish, we've got no mention of sheep farms and none of horses. Trees, though, is the other big thing. Now, trees are not really individual, like even a small farmer's domain. It's more like estate operation, tree work, and almost certainly the sawmills are owned by the Lairds. He says many thousands of fir trees are annually cut on the estates of the three parts, the Lovetts, the Chisholms and the Struries. That's the ones up there beyond the confluence. That place Strury we saw, spelled with a Y sometimes. There are three sawmills constantly at work, he says, and they saw up the timber into, lumber, into into square blocks and lengths and so on. Square it up for the Scottish market and also to be sent to England. So that's the timber that's coming out down to Bewley to be put on ships and taken off to the markets. So it's quite a big thing. And I guess that you got to think about, like the thing we always try and do in these sessions is not just to say they do that, but to think, how does that relate to people earning an income? Well, it probably means you've got a bit of wood you can burn because there's offcuts and so on associated with the timber. That'd be something that would be beneficial to people here, especially those parts that have the average temperature of 2 and 3 degrees a day, mean temperature. And it also means there's work, doesn't it? Planting out trees when they chop down the mature ones, and pruning and various other operations that will give people work on the estates. So he says that local trees had been used to build a ship of 90 tons. I don't know exactly what that means, but it's quite a big ship. And these are typical of the sort of ships that are then sold on to Inverness. Well, that's one that's been just finished recently. And they're sold to Inverness and they're used to trade up and down from Inverness to London. So, you're getting connected to the outside world. I think this is the big picture of what we're seeing in this particular parish, that people are getting much more modern in the sense of being interconnected economically, doing things to sell other parts of the world, working together to produce something, probably using money much more than we saw in many of these other parishes. It's a much more modern place than many of the others we've looked at. And 2 ships are currently under construction there in Bewley. So it's a good thing.
Yeah, Bruce, would the Scottish homes start to be built with wood?
Some are, but I think they're talking about the home market doesn't mean for use of building homes. It means the domestic market for Scotland. But there would be timber used in roofs and so on. That's more like the trusses of roofs, I think, is a more typical use. Often houses in Scotland were built of stone, and we've seen how they put them together in the sort of basic ones with clay, rather than mortar or anything. They would put them together with clay, and then of course you could just pull the stones off and move them somewhere else if you wanted to as well. That makes it easier to move them. Barbara, does that answer your question?
Yes.
So trusses and so on. Potato as well. He's a fan of the potato, I got to tell you. He says 20 years earlier, the people, especially in the highland parts of this parish where they can't grow grain themselves, had spent up to about £500 buying in meal. That means crushed or milled grain. That's a lot of money. And then he just talks about the useful root, the potato, we've seen it being introduced only a generation or 2 in some of these parishes we've been looking at, because it came from Peru and South America, that part of Peru, generally South America. And it's accrued great advantages to the local people, he says. Well, of course, he doesn't know about the potato famine that's coming in a generation or 2's time, but that's what he thinks at the time. And he says, perhaps more than any other part of the country, they've benefited from the introduction of the potato. And the minister's even been helping them with some scientific experiments in how to grow potatoes, this new thing. And he said that he boasts that he's produced 11 crops of potatoes successively on the same piece of land without a particle of manure. And of course, he's not using manure to mean poop there. He's using it to mean any type of fertilizer, like lime or other types of fertilizer. So he's really a rap for it. And then he starts talking about the grain. He says there is a bit of oats and barley and peas and rice and some wheat produced. But he says, forget about all that. Go off and grow potatoes. They're much more important. You'll be better off thinking about growing potatoes. So he's a rap for the spud. But, you know, nonetheless, with this bit of grain that is produced, would provide some employment, work as a ploughman, you know, these sorts of occupations or income sources. Ploughman is one of those professions I think of like a bridge from being a feudal servant, permanently just doing what the laird tells you, to being a ploughman in your own right. That's like a sort of early trade that people adopt. Often we see McLennans becoming fleshers, butchers, in the same sort of way. You know, they move really to being more like self-employed, from being a feudal worker, and through these sort of occupations like ploughman, bootmaker, what did I just say? Flesher, and so on. These are the sort of transitional things to becoming self-employed. And that means they travel around a bit more too. You often see them moving. They can move from being under a feudal estate to go somewhere else. So then now let's look at how much people earn and so on, what they pay for things. So let's just go down to the bottom for a start. Down the bottom here, you can see that typically £3 to £5 a year is a typical servant's income. This is more like the feudal system, you know, being associated permanently with a laird. Probably you get some space to have your home and your kitchen garden and run a few of your own private sheep, just like a local person. This is before proper crofting comes in, so you don't have much rights. You're just a servant. And then if you're employed on a day as a day labourer, you earn like 8 pence to 1 shilling. Remember, there are 20 shillings to the pound. So looking at how much that might earn you, what you need to buy things with. So a meal, you'd pay for a bowl, which is about, you know, 140 pounds weight, a bowl of meal. So that's quite a lot, 140 pounds. Some people weigh that much, do they? You talk to me. I don't understand it. I think that's a stone, isn't it? So a weight like that, a bowl, costs you 16 shillings. That's, you know, 2/3 of a pound roughly, to £1 for the meal, milled oats. What you and I might call raw porridge. Not grits. Talk about grits to me. Kathy understands about grits. What's grits made of?
Grits aren't that they're not milled,
Corn.
so they have aren't they?
I had some in Fredericksburg, I know, in Virginia, for breakfast every day.
They're delicious.
I were too.
It's made of corn.
Corn. Okay.
Right. Corn, not sweet corn, but maize, like maize. Is that right? That sort of
Well,
corn.
Yellow corn as well.
All right.
Yeah.
Delicious. I agree with you, Kathy. Anyway, this is what they do for. So this gives you an idea then how much they have to work for one person weight, let's call it, of raw porridge. They need to work for 1/3 of a year to buy that meal. So you can see why the potato is such an important thing, because they can just put some seed potato in the ground and up it comes, and not under threat from, you know, winds and rain and cold and all that things that are above the surface like grains are. Here's the rents. Just, I think the main point of this is not so much how much rent individuals pay, because we can't really work that out from here, but this gives you an idea of the split of the importance of the lairds that there are in the parish. So the Frasers, the people from Beaufort Castle, right? They have that much rent coming in. The Chisholms, that's the people from that rather today luxurious castle. The Papist part of the world, parish, have not that much less than the Lovetts, and these other two, this is the people to the west of the castle of the Chisholms, the Frasers of Struy, have just 400. That's quite a bit less than there, and then just the ones that where that island was is just a small amount. Now let's talk then about the Lovetts, because the Lord of Lovat is such an important person to this parish, and what he decides will make an impact on the local people. The first lords of Lovat were in fact Bissett family, the Bissets of Lovat, and they evolved into the Frasers through, I think, not so much conflict, but through intermarriage, and no heir. I think that's what happened. The Bissets are another Anglo-Norman family, part of this Norman conquest, and then inviting the Normans to be the proprietors and lairds in Scotland. And this they came there after this sort of date, 1066. This is another century later, and so the Bissets are quite important, and it's the Bissets who invite the monks to set up the priory. It's in that sort of period, right? Now there you go. In 1230, some say 1232, some say 1230. The John Bissett invited the monks from not really France, but actually at that time Burgundy was a separate country. He invited the monks from Burgundy to set up the priory there. The minister gives a quote, actually. I'll tell you that later. He says that, this is the Bissets involved there. And then along come the Frasers. Quite often the name Fraser is associated with the Frenchness, but quite often it's associated with the French word for strawberries. And this is one of the crests. Anybody know the French word for strawberry? It's something like that, fraise, isn't it? Not fresh, not the same as fresh, but it's fraise.
Framboise.
Oh, Donald.
No, framboise is raspberry.
Raspberry.
Fraise.
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 Yeah.
Fraise.
Yeah, so you can see that it's pretty close to the name Fraser. But if you look it up, really, people don't say that it's a direct corruption of the word strawberry. So I wouldn't push that too far, that argument. That's what I'm saying. But you do often see the strawberries in their coats of arms. So there you go. Their motto is "Je suis prêt," meaning I am ready, which sort of speaks for the king, right? And here you have it, how it happened. At this Methven battle, Sir Simon then led the troops alongside Robert the Bruce, saving the king's life, not just once, but 3 times. So that's pretty good credentials for getting yourself a patch in the Highlands, isn't it? Saved the king's life 3 times, and obviously he's supporting Robert the Bruce, so he's got the gig. And then in a century later, they get the brief, really, from the king to go out and bash up the Clan Donald, the McDonalds, who were the Lord of the Isles and thought they ran a separate country to Scotland. The Lovetts were in the thick of it there. And from that base, they then went on to be a very important part of the scene there in Inverness, and not just Inverness Shear, but also into other parts of the Highlands. So the Frasers are quite an important mix. Here's their seat, their pad. This is not what was there in the 1790s, although the one that was there was called Castle Downey, and that's the term still used rather than Beaufort Castle to refer to this by the local people. And so that's this one actually was rebuilt, refurbished, more than refurbished. A lot of stonework was done in the 1780s and 1790s, 1770s and 1780s. No, 1870s and 1880s. Get this right, Bruce. And so, you know, what we see here today really is more the result of the late 1800s, not what was there in 1700. In fact, the castle that was there in 1745 was burnt to the ground by the Butcher of Cumberland's henchmen, raiding and plundering around Scotland and the Highlands, and taking retribution for the what they saw as the offensive Culloden event. So Simon Fraser, the laird at the time, had been during, you see, he lived quite a long life. He lived right up to the mid 1700s, but he was there he was an adult and, you know, significant during the early Jacobite risings in 1715 and 1719. And he fought alongside the Hanoverians, meaning the kings, right? The kings of England and Scotland. But in 1745 and 1746, he changed his mind. He switched over to support the Jacobites, and so he was captured after the Culloden, taken as a prisoner to London, and after a lot of preparations and so on, there was a trial, and he was executed as a result of his disloyalty, as they saw it. It said he was the last person to be executed in the Tower of London. I'm guessing this picture is like so many, the picture that's painted by the victors. William Hogarth was a famous portrait photographer, of course, but they all had their masters, and this was him on his way to the trial. And I think he's probably painted that to you know how they make out Charles Edward Stuart to be a bit of a clown, dress him up in fancy dress and so on to make him look like a bit of an idiot. Well, this is probably a bit the same sort of idea, that, you know, history is told by the victors. Okay, so the fox he's called, you know, by his enemies because of his craftiness, changing sides. Let's look at the lands that they controlled now, the more important part to us, which is who were the lairds of different parts of this parish. That's what really matters to us. So here we've got, you know, just to get our bearings again, here's Bewley over here, here's Kilmorack the church, here's Beaufort Castle here, and then coming up the river, you've got the confluence here, and you've got the Heckless Castle here at the confluence, and then you've got the other bit, the Struy part up in here. So the Frasers, you know, of Beaufort Castle are controlling all this area in the lower part of Kilmorack, here, Kilmorack, and then they're also controlling this part of Kiltarlity, Kirk Hill, and down here, various parts, Dawes and the like, are all part of the Fraser estates. Quite a big area. And then you've got this section up here, the Struy part that I mentioned, and that's like a separate family that we saw there on that list of the estate rents. This is like listed, and there was at that time a separate Struy family of Frasers, Fraser of Struy. But then you've got the Chisholm part, which you remember their castle is here, Earthless Castle, that's the Chisholm seat. And their area covers this sort of swathe through here. And you'll remember that when we did the Kintail parish last time, the Chisholms had the rights to the land in the upper parts of Kintail, which is through here. So they're, you know, just extending their area down into here. And the other connection with what we're looking at here, just out of interest, as an aside, you remember when we looked at Redcastle, which is over here, and that's in Killearn and parish. We knew that after all that drama of the Mackenzie owner of Redcastle, it was bought out by a person who, by the name of Grant, who had been in service in India, and as had many of his other grants from their parish. And this is where they came from in here, these grants. This is them. This is the same family that acquired that thing there and went off to, a lot of them, to India to do service and fight battles and like in India. So this had a strong connection with India, this part here. I really want you to look at this little capital lettered thing in here, the Laird, right? That's the Laird there. And that's the sort of important part of the Fraser's estate, the Laird. And it's from there that the Mackenzies came to go to Kintail. This is the Laird. You know, they came after the McLennans were well established there. The McRaes got up, and some of them, not all of them, and went to Kintail, putting this connection between here and Kintail down here. Yeah. Okay. Any questions about that? Quite interesting, the interconnections there. Now the Chisholms, let's talk about them now. They too are of Norman origin and had this rather French word. Maybe somebody knows that means something. Does it mean anything to anybody? Not me. Anyway, that's what they were called. That was their name. It presumably is a place with the D in front of it. And it's a Norman French name, right? French language. And they added to it the Saxon term home, Hume actually is probably pronounced in those days. But by adding the two together, they came up with this de Chisholm, like that, and that became Chisholm, the way we see it written today. They earned their stripes by defending Inverness in 1647, and after the Restoration, they supported the monarchy. They got a commission of fire and sword. You know these things? It's where the king says you can go and kill as many of them as you like. Do it. Get on with it. And that's the commission of fire and sword. The same thing that the Mackenzies got to acquire Gairloch, commission of fire and sword. In this case, against the MacDonalds. In that case, it was against the MacLeods. And that was in 1681. So history goes back a fair way here. That's, you know, like the early Reformation. And they supported the Jacobites during the first risings, and they forfeited their estates after the 1719, the time when the castle or the fort on Eilean Donan was destroyed, and they forfeited their estates, but they were pardoned. It's really not that long later, is it? It's only like a decade after they got pardoned and got their estates back. So there you go. And then coming on to the time of Culloden and so on, Roderick, the 21st Laird of Chisholm of Chisholm, Roderick Chisholm, the 21, supported the Jacobites in the uprising, and a son and 29 other clansmen were killed at Culloden. Then during our time of this statistical account, Alexander Chisholm died just before the account was written, 1793, and he was succeeded by his brother, William, the 24th of Chisholm. Yeah, so there he's the one who's there at the time of our statistical account. You got to like their motto up here. This is Latin, of course, and that's obviously the first person because it says, "I am fierce," and I am fierce with the fierce. Hey, that's a good, pretty tough sort of thing. So now coming back to the church and what was happening in the church and what was some more detail about the church. We saw this map before where the church is alongside the locality of Kilmorack, near the Balblair Woods. It's and also, most importantly, near those wonderful falls. And the graveyard is over on this side. There's the Black Bridge going across here, Black Bridge, and the old Kiltardy Church, now in ruins in 1871, and there's a sawmill there beside it. So the minister describes the church. The church is new at this time, and this is the same church. It's still there today. And we learned from other sources that it was built in 1786. So, it's only like a decade old at the time of writing the statistical account. He says, Fraser of Lovett is the patron of the parish. Now that means, of course, that he's the one who can present the minister to the congregation for their approval. This, I don't know how many of you know this. Does anybody want to know a little bit more about polity, what it's called, the process in the Presbyterian Church? It's quite important. Someone, otherwise I'll carry on. Do you know about this? Come on. No. Kathy says, talk about it. The system really that came through from Knox back from Geneva was that the congregation should have its own the individual should have their own relationship with God and not have interposed clergy or bishops. And this is what created all the strife for centuries. But so the idea was that the idea still is that the congregations of these so-called Presbyterian churches, it's more referring to the polity than the name, choose their own minister. And even the minister is not really called a minister, like in the sense of being the head, in charge of the church. He's really thought of as being one of the elders, but he's called the teaching elder of our congregation. So that's like the technical way of describing his role, the minister. And the congregation will choose their minister. And ministers themselves, when they're interested in moving parish, will go and give a sermon or conduct a service at a church. It's called preaching for a call. And so the congregation are choosing. They set up a process of the senior people in the church, and often they'll consult the congregation after these people have come to preach for a call, and decide to appoint somebody, but it comes from the congregation. So when we say, and when the Fasti says that a minister was presented by, and it can be the Queen or the King, it can be the local laird, or it can be someone from an intermediate thing, some laird from somewhere, nearby. But it's never done by the church structure. There's no bishop that says to the minister, you're going to go there. That's not the way it works in Presbyterian polity. So here when it says Fraser of Lovett presents the minister to the parish, he's the one who does the presenting. That's a really big deal. But in later times, we have the disruption where the congregations say, well, you're not going to have that anymore. We're not going to have we believe that our church system doesn't mean that the lairds can tell us who we can have as the minister by presenting them. We're just going to make our own decisions. That's the later disruptions in the church. Anyway, so this is what happens at that time. It's not the king, it's not the overriding people from Inverness. It's certainly not the church, but it's Lovett who he's the patron and presents the ministers, the new minister. Anyway, it's not such a big deal here because they're not changes very often. He says there are 3 places where they conduct worship, but in fact, he doesn't go to any of the other ones. There's a missionary in the nearby parish of Kiltardy, and that minister goes to the other places. The manse have been constructed since this minister's arrival, the current minister's arrival. This is my photo of the church that was built in 1786. You can see when I took this photo a few years ago, there were headstones all over the place behind the church. But we know that the headstones that were there in earlier times, even 1871, were on the riverside. And this is overlooking the falls. It's a art gallery, a bit of a sort of art workshop really today. Not a church anymore. The churches are in Bewley. Now, I'll brush over these because we are running out of time here. But there was quite an interesting story in 1711. The presbytery, that means the ministers from the surrounding and some elders from the surrounding parishes, came together to induct a new minister to this parish called Thomas Chisholm. And a rabble of the local people blocked the entrance to the church and went all around the outside of the church saying, "We're not having this fellow, we don't want him." And they retired to the manse just a bit further, as we know, not far away. And there they were pelted with stones through the windows and all this sort of thing. And they thought, we better make our escape. So while they were making their escape, they were thrown clods of earth and so on them. And they had to go to Kilturn, where they appointed this fellow. But it all died down, and he was actually the minister for 57 years after this rather eventful appointment. And then in due course, his son, in 1754, his son became assistant and successor. That's a appointed position, you know, meaning that he's there to take over from his father if he should die. And in fact, they both finished up dying in 1768, one early in the year and one later, the father and the son. And the current minister that we have now, who wrote the statistical account, took over from them. Those two had been there so long, the father and the son. Well, the son only for a matter of months, really, as in charge. He, John Fraser, the current minister, was the son of a Simon Fraser. You've got to know Simon, as you've seen already, is a name that's associated very strongly with Frasers. He was educated at King's College in Aberdeen. He married a Margaret Nicholson in 1775, and they had a number of children. One of whom became one was a Simon, as we know. The one, no, we don't know. So the Simon we will know in a minute, and an Alexander who was in this regiment, and he died, our current minister, not long after he wrote the statistical account in 1798, just 6 years later. He's succeeded, though, by his son Simon. That's the one there in the right-hand bottom side. His son Simon, who himself died in 1845. And he was presented by Fraser of Lovett, as we know, presented by. He married twice, had one daughter by the first wife, died 18. They married and died in the same year, this wife, but they had a daughter, perhaps a childbirth. Then he married again in 1807, had 6 children, and one of them succeeded his father. What do you know? That seems to be the pattern, doesn't it? And in fact, another son was a minister of a parish of Uig. There are 2 Uig parishes, one in Skye and one on Lewis, so we can't really be sure which it was from this short account. And then his son, Simon, was educated at King's College and became a minister here too. Now, there are quite a lot of papists, as the minister calls them, Roman Catholics, in this parish. About a third of the congregation, the third of the total population is some part of this Chisholm's property in the higher part of the parish, and there are like 600 to 700 of them. A lot, really, you know, and there are still a lot of Roman Catholics in Bewley and nearby. This explains why, the Chisholms. So if you see, so you might, if you've got people in this parish, you might go and look at the Catholic accounts that are the Catholic birth records and so on. They're not very complete, but you might find your relations in the Catholic series on Scotland's people, not in the established church. 2 schools, one parochial, meaning funded by the Laird, another one by the Society for the Propagation of Christian Knowledge, as we've seen before, a sort of trade operation, and apparently 2 Roman Catholic churches have schools associated with them in the upper part of the parish. There's a bit of a story here about the first post office being established in Bewley. You know, some of the gentlemen used to have a runner go into Inverness and back. But eventually this Fraser fellow, who'd had no personal interest in getting a post office because he got his mail another way, but he agitated till a post office was set up, and it was very successful. So you can see this parish is coming into the modern world. They're now getting post offices, they've got shipbuilding, they've got money coming in and out from external sources. So it's a more modern place, becoming more modern. It doesn't rank terribly highly in our usual pie chart of the number of McLennans born in this parish in the first decade of the 1800s. In fact, it's only 17th on the pie chart way around here. But if you look at, say, another way of looking at it is a lot of people came and went through this parish, so they might not have been born there. And the records, of course, are fairly incomplete. So if I look at the notes and see how many of the individuals we have, and you know we now have over 50,000 individuals in our clan records, that we've got 776 notes of those people, that is mentioned anywhere in the censuses or the other information, headstones. In 776 of our notes, we've got a mention of this word Kilmorack. So it tells you that quite a few people are associated, and that includes all the people from all over the world in our clan records, right? So I don't know how many would be from Scotland only. So here's an example of the sort of thing you see if you're in this parish. Here's a Thomas fellow. David, this is relevant to you. You there, David? And this is your ancestor, Thomas. Born, notionally, he's born in 1803. I did look up the Roman Catholic entries for births in Scotland's people around about 1800 for this parish, and there are none, either 10 years either side of 1800. So they probably would have baptised their children at Eskdale, which is a Catholic church, but no record there either for any McLennans. This is the Thomas. He was born there, as I say, that thoughtfully died after 1855. That was nice of him. And he's then living later years in up there in near Bewley, just behind Bewley there, this place called Rulick. And that's his death record. There we've got the whole death record. And if you go down the page, on the proper page, you'll see the full document of his death record. And here we've transcribed it in there, David, to show the details of his death record. And this is how we show them, David. The censuses are like that, in that sort of format. So we put them in. It's really important to us to put all these censuses in because you can see them one decade after the other. And even if the ages change a bit and some children come along and some go away to be adults and so on, you can see the progression of the family through the decades, and you're confident that you've got the right people in the family. That's our very important part of our proof. They're one of the great grandchildren of this Thomas was a famous author, a South African author and poet, book writer called Don McLennan, number 32574. So there's the number there that you see, the ID number. That first thing is an I, not a 1. You can just make out the difference. I, not the next number's a 1 there. Funny, it's 1792, isn't it? It's not a year, it's just his number. It's typical of our pages. You know, here's someone born in, and he has these children in South Africa, and we trace them through. Here's another one, another case. This is more illustrating the commercial sort of side of people. This is someone who was born in 1805-ish in Kilmorack. Again, you know, no birth record for him. We would have it if it was there, but we've got his death record, and we've got his probate, and we've got his children. His children were quite high achievers. One of them became a minister, had an MA from Glasgow. Another one, William, became a doctor, lecturer in medicine at the Queen Margaret College in Glasgow, and degree examiner for medicine, clinical medicine at the university, taught clinical medicine. And another one is an MB and so on. You know, quite high achieving people. He himself was a silk merchant, born in Kilmorack, went to Glasgow, became a silk merchant, and obviously prospered and was able to support. You can see he's called Simon. Look, his mother's a Fraser, right? So you can sort of get a hint where he got that name from. You know, that's a bit of this Scottish naming pattern. It's quite likely her mother was a Simon. We don't know that, but That'll be my guess. What do you think, Melanie? Good? You can make it, we can learn a lot from that. And a thing you can see in some of Scotland's people is that this is his death, what we call citation, meaning it's the search results for the death index in Scotland's people. And in some of them, they've put in the mother's maiden name. You know, in many ones around the world, you get to see the full names of the parents, but in Scotland's people, you didn't used to get anything about the parents in the search results like this, but Scotland's people slowly, progressively are adding the mother's maiden name, like in this case, Fraser, into their search results, which is a big help, of course, if you've got a common name like John or Mary or something. So look for that there, the maiden name of the mother. That's a confirmation that we've got the right one. Pretty certain, especially with a name like Simon. There's so few of them in the McLennans. Okay. So that's your answer. I don't know if there's anybody here that's descended from that, but that's a family. Here's another one. Again, no birth record, but this one moved to the north of the Highlands and there married someone from Editon, which is up there near Dornoch, and had all their children in Roskeen, this parish up in that direction. And they died all over the place. So you can see here, we've got the headstone transcription here. And if you look down the page, you'll see the actual picture of the headstone and the transcription of it. But this is the transcription. We copy it from the transcription up to here. And here you can see this stone was erected by Hugh McLennan of Mill Craig. Yeah, this is a name that you see in the census there. In memory of his father, Alex, who died 22nd of October 1851, so before registration, aged 58. His mother, Elizabeth MacLeod, who died in 1871, aged 70. And his brother, John, who died in Liverpool, that's in England, in 1870, aged 33 years. So Hugh, that's mentioned there, Hugh, there he is, the oldest child. Father, Alex, yes, tick. Mother, Elizabeth MacLeod, tick. Brother John, here's brother John, born, died, you can see there, 38 years, a bit different to what it says there, but still. And there he is, dying in Liverpool in 1870. So, this is quite good confirmation that we've got the right records here. Well, then, there are occasionally errors, I've got to say to you, but not very often. We try to put all this proof in there as evidence. So you might disagree with something, but you need to sort of look at the evidence to see how we've supported it and why it's not right. This guy became a sawyer, meaning he did sawing. So that's an interesting thing for someone from Kilmorack to do, where there was so much timber, lumber. This is just an idea I have for you people. It's just a sort of random idea, but I reckon if I go, I'd love to find someone who would like to walk from where I took that photo across to Kintail. So I looked it up on Google Maps, Afric Lodge to Morvich, which is just there behind Kintail, would take 6 hours and 9 minutes. And there's apparently a very good hostel in here. If you want to stop halfway, I can do that. And basically, if you go in that direction, of course, you're going downhill. Look at the profile. Good, eh? Not much uphill involved. What do you think, David? Up for it? So when we have the gathering, that could be on the ticket. Andy'd be up for it, wouldn't he, Melanie?
Yes, he would.
Now, just a couple of curiosities. I'll skip over these very quickly. This is the Priory, the name we got from beautiful place. Bissett's we know about. It operated from the 1200s until the Reformation in the mid-1500s, saw the end of the cloistered life. The Bissetts who agreed for these monks to come, they came from Burgundy, as I said, and the place was called Valley of the Cabbages. It's an unlikely thing. If you see the name of their order, it's actually the Valley of the Cabbages. But I translated the Latin that's in the old statistical account that I've got here, the Latin using Google Translate. And the monks agreed that they would pray for Bissett, John Bissett, while he was alive. And after death, they would take up the corpse and the soul departing from the body through continued sacrifice and deeds of piety. So when they carried on for 300 years with sacrifices and deeds of poverty, that was because of their initial agreement to come to this building. It was aisleless. You can see how narrow it is. No wonder they didn't have an aisle down the middle. But that saw the end of 300 years of piety there. The interesting thing for us is that the Mackenzies are buried there. The early Mackenzies, you know, these are the people who gave the name. Kenneth that's the name really that's in there. That's a corruption of the word Kenneth, Mackenzie. And it's these people who were the initial people who got the rights to Kintail and Island Donan and so on. And they're all buried here in a crypt on the side of the Bewley Priory. So this is a bit of a clue. This particular one is for Alexander, the very earliest one. Look at that. It's quite important, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's this that gives people the idea that maybe the Mackenzies came from the Laird, as did the McRaes, because the Mackenzies invited the McRaes across from the Laird to Kintail. Melanie?
Yeah, I've just found another note on Bewley, and there's actually way more of the Lairds of Mackenzie buried there.
Yeah.
There's another Kenneth in 1492, a John in 1561,
Yeah.
a Kenneth in 1568, and Colin, who died in 1594. He died at Redcastle and was buried at Bewley.
Yeah, so it means that why are they being buried here? It's something to do with their association with this part of the world. You'd have to think that'd be the normal thing. And so this lends weight to the speculation that the Mackenzie's origins were in the Laird, as were the origins of the McRaes. So that's a very important thing for us generally. Just hill forts, there are some things, I won't go into great detail, but I use this map of the hill fort. There are these hill forts around here. In particular, there's this one here that's right near the bridge I showed you the picture of, the Lovett Bridge. And there were two precious urns were excavated from there. You can see those by going to this thing, Canmore. I'd recommend anybody who wants to research some particular place uses Canmore. It's like an archaeological site of all sorts of places, wonderful history. And there's a publication by the same Merrill Marshall who wrote the book about Strathconan for the North of Scotland Archaeological Society. She's written a little report about this site, and she says that it's so under threat from the quarry, that all this area here is the quarry and the electricity substation for the hydro plant on the falls, that the excavation of the quarry is only 20 meters away from this really old, like, thousands of years old, not just a little bit old, fort that was there. And this is a picture of the fort as it is. You see the mounds and so on. So really too close. What she called it, she says, a lament for a once magical place. There's also this Balblair stone. That's just a thing. This is some, Neolithic or something. It's really old, prehistoric or early medieval. And it was just for years, centuries, just outside in the weather at a Fraser Castle, being a bit of a local thing to kick around. It's now in a museum being looked after. But it's a picture of a Pictish man walking. You can see it there holding a stick or a staff or sword or something like that. That's part of the thing. And there's the Canmore thing. So Balblair stone, you can just Google that. Just to summarise today, I hope we've covered quite a bit about the unlikely and unusual topography of this parish. And you can see how it's broken up into different regions and different climates and so on. Different things are possible in those places. I think overall it certainly has some more connection with the more modern world as we would know it today. The number of people who were there, something about the ministers and the heritors, and some of the McLennans we looked at briefly. So I hope you've enjoyed today's session.